So you're hosting a campaign. You have maybe 24 adventures planned out. You've got a dozen players that have been invited. You're not sure who's going to show up. You schedule the first date time, and you have let everyone know it's going to be a session 0. Now, those of you that have never played role-play games before have no idea what a session 0 is. But tonight, Jonathan Albin, the Game Master's Guide, will not only outline what is in a session 0, but I will also elucidate precisely why you want to host a session 0 before your story gets started. Before we get to that, go ahead and push all the buttons down below so that the algorithm knows that you're part of our audience, and let's get started.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so session 0. I want to provide you with the complete protocols. I want to give you everything you're going to need. And if you're taking notes, this will be basically a point 1, point 2, point 3 kind of presentation. So just watch the headers. That'll give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Now, what are session 0 protocols? Well, protocols are fundamentally the same thing as guidelines or rules, just a kind of a cool word that starts with a P. I happen to like it. So the session 0 protocols are, from my position as a game master with more than 50 years behind the shield, kind of a guideline for how to bring the players up to speed on what it is that you're wanting to do with your game sessions, and more importantly, allow you to get feedback from your players about what they are looking for. Now, this isn't the same as the game players checklist that I send out, and I'll give you that in a comment down below. I'll put it in the description. But the player checklist basically tells you what kind of a game players are looking for, and then that way you can sculpt your sessions, your story, if you will, to match as many of those as possible. But in certain cases, the session 0 allows you to perhaps catch some of the glitches in the system, so to speak, the places where the players didn't speak their minds or were perhaps being clever, or maybe they aren't sure how to tell you what they want. And so therefore the session 0 is a real way to shake out the problems and the challenges that the scenes that you're going to present might cause. And so we're going to go through them step by step, and I believe I have like 6 or 7 of them. Let me do a quick check. Yeah, I have 7 particular checkpoints, and I'm not going to do a clickbaity kind of leader. In other words, I'm not going to say the 7 keys you need to. No, I'm just going to just call this the session 0 protocols, and we'll go with that. The challenge has always been, especially since this is a relatively new channel, is how do we get word out about it. So again, if you haven't, make sure you watch the video to the end, because there's some really cool things I say near the end. And in particular, you'll want to share this video with as many people as you can, because there are a lot of people that are doing session 0 wrong and are giving players a either an incomplete image of what's going on in their story, or perhaps are working too hard to cover things that don't really need to be covered in the session 0. So let's go on to the first one. Okay, so the first one is actually 3. The idea here is that your session 0 should be an introduction of your players to not only the specific location of your story, but also the way it's going to feel, or way you intend for it to feel, and also how they are going to play a part in it. Some people look at these 3 and say they don't understand them, and I did a video just a couple days ago that I'll put a link for this one as well. But that video particularly gives information on what I call the stew pot, and setting, theme, and plot. In my phrase, it would be setting, theme, emphasis, and way, but we'll deal with that later. But it's the stew pot. This is the elements that the players can really get their teeth into and can embrace when they're building their character. If they look at the story elements and put in the pieces that they have in their mind on ways that they can be best fit within the setting, within the theme, and so on, it really helps to make that character feel included in that very first session. Now, some people look at a session 0 literally as a first play session and play out an entire cadre of scenes and just chunk it full of stuff. And I just want you to realize that the session 0 really is the icebreaker. It's the ask me anything. It's the reviews before the product comes out and that kind of thing. There's all kinds of separate pieces that make up a session 0, but they don't necessarily mean that you're playing through an entire encounter or an entire series of encounters. So the idea, therefore, is we want to solidify what the world is like. I make it, in my mind, it's akin to being in a swimming pool and being able to push off the side. You know what your safety is and how far away from the edge you can go, but it's setting up those outer perimeters and parameters. Works for both. The idea of the outer parameters of the setting so that the players can build within that framework. And even if they stretch outside, at least you have opportunities to weave the extra bits back into the story as you intended. The second thing we're going to talk about is gameplay dynamics and clarifications. So, session 0, outline which game system you're going to use. Of course, I always recommend Nikos RPG, which is available at the Shopify store below. But in addition to the information about the game system, you're also going to talk about the dynamics and clarifications. So, for example, Dungeons & Dragons has, I think, 3 or 4 sanctioned worlds within their framework. So if you're playing within the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, then you specify whether it's Eberron or Faerun or whatever. And by giving a description of the world in those kind of terms, you're giving, again, outlines and boundaries for your players to work with when they're building their characters. And this also is the time that you talk about clarifications, like, for example, the mechanism for dealing with near-death experiences, the idea of the death saves, whether you're going to use that ruling or whether you have another way that you want to handle characters as they reach low hit points. And that's if you're using, of course, classic RPGs. Nikos doesn't have those. But even with that, the clarification of the parameters really helps the players to get a feel for what's going on. We'll go into particulars on what you might want to include, but this is generally talking about which game system you're going to use, which kind of dice you're going to use, whether or not the dice should stay on the table when they roll. What do you do with the re-roll? Do you grant inspiration automatically, or are there ways that you use a re-roll mechanism within your game system? Ooh, my camera's fritzing. I better stop fiddling around. Didn't realize it was pursuing me so adamantly on this setting. But the making sure that your players are clear on what is allowed and what is necessary to be identified is really important, so that the players, again, feel that edge and know how to push off and get and ascend or descend into your world and to experience it fully. Next point we're going to talk about is player motivations and expectation. And while I already mentioned the fact that there's the checklist that gives you a lot of information, and it is linked below, or it will be linked below, but the player motivations and expectations are when the players tell you as the game master what it is they're expecting to get from the game. Are they looking for combat heavy mechanism? Are they wanting mystery and novelty? In other words, are they playing that they are literally new into the world or new into the experience that you're taking them into? Or are they veterans and have a lot of resources and therefore can play with more information rather than less. It also applies to whether their expectation is to be in a gritty world where there is the possibility of death, or if they are character elimination averse and want to play a system that is more secure. Are they into puzzles? Are they not into puzzles, etc.? So by getting feedback from your players about what they're looking for, it's odd that in some cases session 0 sometimes is also the last session that a player will play with you, because their motivations and expectations were not addressed or not handled. So make sure that you give them plenty of time for them to give you what they're wanting from the game, because it's important, of course, that your players have a good time, because that's what the purpose of all of this is anyway. But the very nature of information and communication is that you get as much as you give, and so therefore the players need to provide with you what they would like to see in the story, whether they're looking for easy, medium, or tough, compared to whether they are looking at a story railroad. There are actually players who would prefer to have everything sort of spoon-fed to them scene by scene, so that they can appreciate the worldview, because they're there more as tourists than they are being in that expectation of playing. And it also lets you as a game master sort of feed back to them what you are expecting from the players as well. The next thing we need to talk about is the schedule and tempo. Now, those are all about timing, so I'm putting them together. But in reality, players' schedule, by the time you get to session 0, you probably already have an idea of what schedule you're going to run, whether it be a weekly or a monthly or whatever. And dealing with the particulars of schedule also gives you an idea of how frequency you're going to play, and therefore from that you can determine the tempo. And by tempo, I'm referring to how many encounters can you accomplish in a given session without breaking the time bank, so to speak. How many session interactions can you have before the players get burnout or whatever. All these things play into the timing of your game, and we want to make sure that's as fluid as possible for the players, so that when they move into the periodic actual event, whether it be once a month or once a week or daily or whatever that you're setting up, that the players can feel the accommodation and also be comfortable with the amount of time you are taking out of the game session to do each part. The next thing you're going to want to do, and this is where, if there is going to be a session 0 action, it will be in this preamble and or prologue. One of the lessons I've learned is that players would much prefer that you show them something about your world rather than tell them. The idea of the extra long prologue where the game master waxes eloquently about the dimensions of his world. I'm totally guilty of this in the past, but one of the things that I found to be more effective and have therefore trimmed down going forward is the amount of information the players get at the beginning. They certainly will have questions as they go along, and when you have already given them a lot to chew on as far as they're building the character to the parameters that they are wanting to play within the game, and they're dealing with all of the nuances that you've already outlined to them in dealing with the setting and such, it's much more important for them to feel the experience that you're intending for them, at least a little, so that they have an idea of what they can expect. And so having a small prologue, or conversely, if you are one who waxes poetic, a preamble, a presentation about what's going on in the world up until this point, what in my regular game sessions I call our story so far, but the idea of a piece of data that they either gather through your pontification and presentation or from the actual play of the game. And again, 50 years of experience speaking, go ahead and make it a prologue, because it's going to carry much more information in a shorter period of time. And this also feeds into something from yesterday's presentation about white space. And you want to make sure you give enough room for the players to create their own mental impression of what's going on in your world so that they have their own motivations for how they want to move forward. Now, whether you actually play it out or you are just wanting to describe the setting for them, and an establishing shot in motion pictures and in television, the establishing shot is the camera photography shot of the location that gives you an idea as the viewer where you are and what's going on in the story just from that initial scene, giving you an idea of, okay, this is in a courtroom, or this is in the foyer of a castle, or it's in on the veranda of a southern ranch. The idea of building out the establishing shot really gives your players the opportunity to insert themselves into the scene and therefore have an idea of where they're starting. And it doesn't necessarily mean physically where they're physically standing, but it does give an idea of where the group as a whole comes into the story and has the opportunity to begin part of the story. The establishing shot, again, can be done in the preamble and or the initial scenario, or it can be after the fact where you tell them, okay, given that, we're over here. I've done some of my actual prologue scenes have actually been played out by personas that the characters aren't going to actually play, just so that I can do a narrative on how the game mechanics work that is separate from their characters, but I also am able to give them information about the campaign and where the setting is going to start, and maybe some backstory on what's going on, so that they already have a bit of intrigue about what these scenes represent. And then we get to the part where the game master really has his fun, and that is, let's look at the idea of the game with now all the players' concepts at least inserted into it, so you have an idea where they're coming from. Then you can determine the story focus, what it is that they are currently involved with, what their motivations and motives might be, and also allows them to feel the gravitas or the emphasis that you're wishing to put on the story. And then finally, you can talk about perhaps stuff, the idea of the items that they may or may not already have or may be pursuing or need to find, etc., etc. These separate little elements come up here near the end of the session 0, so that the players can feel that not only are they aware and alert, but they are now also equipped to handle the conflict that is coming at them even from session 1. And by doing this in advance, again, the players can feel that bit of confidence about what's going on and feel completely part of the scenes. At the end, after you've done all of the setup that we've talked about, all the different points in the checklist, you're going to come to the point where there are going to still be questions and concerns. And this is where you as a game master can really excel in your initial presentation, because you are able to answer the questions that the players have, so that they bring themselves finally into the scene as part of it. And these player questions and concerns might be a rehash of something you already covered, or it may be a whole new subject that you haven't driven. And the idea here is that you can, therefore, in this player questions portion, cover basically anything that wasn't covered in any of the other categories above, or might have and they just missed. And so it gives the players permission to, ask questions and perhaps have made mistakes by not catching what you said before, and gives you a second opportunity to cover it. Now, once you've done all these things, the one real important question, of course, is, what do your players think? And I'm asking the same thing for this episode. What do you guys think about this episode? Is this what you would be able to use in your games? I anticipate that the reason why I provided it is that this is what works for me, and I anticipate that it would really work well for you as well. But that's really between you and your players. And so I want to thank you again for being here tonight. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG, and I will see you next time.